competition. So in a sense, maths kid right next to the financial center, you might think I was predestined in a way. But the truth is, if you go onto these trading floors nowadays, like I eventually did, you'll see that there's not a lot of kids from East London there. In fact, somebody asked me one time, where's your accent from? It's an interesting accent you've got, despite the fact that it's right here. So the truth is, nowadays, it's largely people from richer families that get into these jobs. But I was able to get into the London School of Economics, which is a big economics university here in London. And I found out that Citibank used to hire one trader a year through a card game. That was basically a maths game. So I entered that maths competition and I won. And that's how I became a trader.
And so, okay, you've spoken about this publicly. What was it like to be at Oxford? Well, because I sometimes wonder if people in the States really understand, like, Oxford isn't just like Harvard. It's like super Harvard. It's Harvard before Harvard was Harvard. And like, what was it like to be a person who is, again, not from these like millionaire families, didn't go to these, private schools? What was it like to be there?
So I went to Oxford quite recently. I went there from 2017 to 2019. And that was after I'd already had my whole career as a trader, basically.
Okay.
Yeah. So I went back there basically as a very successful trader. I'd already developed these ideas about the importance of wealth inequality, and to basically say to these guys, look, you've been predicting the economy wrong for 10 years now. I've been getting it right for 10 years. Let's talk about it. But literally, it was a bunch of very rich, very posh people, and I'm not exaggerating, wearing capes and bow ties and teaching in castles. And they had no interest, and I used to get very angry in the classes. And I remember I was in this mid-year review with all of these teachers with their bow ties and their capes on in this wood-paneled room. And they said, why are you so angry? Like, everything's going great in the economy. And you couldn't help but hear in this sort of wood-paneled room, those two missing words, right? Everything is going great in the economy for us, And we're going to talk about this a lot more, but this is the economy that we're in, where increasingly ordinary people and poorer people are struggling more and more. But, especially if you look at the last 2 years, the average billionaire has doubled their wealth. And wealthier people are doing better than they've ever done before. So, it's very frustrating for me as someone from a poor background in the world of economics, because economics is not like physics. If you drop a rich person and a poor person out the window, they're going to fall at the same speed. But the economy is totally different for rich and poor people. So to go into an economics department where everybody is rich from a rich background was, very frustrating. And I got quite angry sometimes.
Well, I love that you're bringing us to the big thing, right? So you did really well because you're brilliant. You have a mind for economics. You have a mind for finance. So you get into these rooms and you're killing it and you're rising through the ranks. But the bets you're making is that the economy is not going to do well. And could you explain that for people like me who have not worked in finance?
Yeah, okay. So I started working full-time in June 2008. And the big financial crisis sort of had its big explosion in October 2008. So just after I started working, basically. And my job, to summarize largely, my job is to bet on interest rates. So interest rates are supposed to go up when the economy is strong and down when the economy is weak. That's why they're close to zero at the moment. And in 2008, all the interest rates went to zero. And suddenly the job was to bet on when will rates come back up, which is essentially when will rates recover. And the history of this is super interesting, right? Because in 2008, everybody in the city said rates are going to go up in 2009. And they didn't. In 2009, they said, okay, the recovery will happen in 2010. And it didn't. In 2010, they said 2011. In 2011, they said 2012. In 2012, they said 2013. And they kept predicting this recovery every year. It didn't happen. So I was sort of, it's amazing. You go to university, you study economics, you start to believe that we understand what's happening. And then you go to work with all of these multimillionaires and every single year they're wrong. So on the one hand, that was shocking, but also I saw it as a massive opportunity. Like if these guys are wrong, if I can figure out why we're not having a recovery, then I can make a ton of money, basically. So I became pretty much obsessed with understanding why is the economy so persistently weak? Why are we not getting the recovery which everybody is expecting? And, fundamentally, you can boil that question down to a simpler question of why aren't people spending money? Because that is the reason the economy was so consistently weak, because we were not getting the spending that we were expecting. Governments and central banks were pouring hundreds of billions of dollars in every country in the world, but we were not getting that recovery because people weren't spending. And I actually think this is one situation where coming from a poor background really, really benefited me, because ordinary people, they understand why people are not spending money. If you ask an ordinary person why people are not spending money, 9 out of 10 will give you the same answer, which is we don't have any extra money. That's the real situation. And if you look at sort of the situation of ordinary families, most of my friends will never be able to afford property, whereas their parents had properties, So families over the long run, they're already losing their homes. So if you look at the situation of ordinary families, it's very clear they can't spend money because they're not getting any money. But if you're sitting in the skyscrapers in the city, it's very clear these guys are rolling in money. And you can see where the money that is coming in is ending up. So I basically came to the conclusion what we have here is a structural problem of inequality, which back then, sort of 2011, 2012, nobody was talking about that. And I concluded we're not talking about it, so we're not going to fix it. And what that means is we will essentially never get a recovery. So I started to bet very aggressively that there would never be a strong economic recovery. And by the end of 2011, making these very pessimistic bets, I became Citibank's globally most profitable trader. So, yeah, I mean, it's a crazy situation, right? And then the bank paid me millions of dollars and said, well done, mate, do it again. And you can imagine this was a kind of crazy experience for me because on the one hand, I was super pleased that my analysis was right, my predictions were right. On the other, and I was really pleased to make a huge amount of money for me and my family. But on the other hand, the predictions are terrible, right? And, you might think if somebody is adjudged to be an excellent predictor and they're predicting the disaster, that somebody escalates it somehow, somebody calls the prime minister and says, we need to talk about this. But all that happens is they pay you millions of dollars and they say, do it again. And it sort of led to a bit of a crisis in me personally. Like, what does this mean? What do I do? How do I deal with this? Because, the people who get hurt in these crises, it's ordinary people. And most of those traders working on the trading floor, they're from very rich families, elite private schools, elite universities. But I'm not from that background. And the people who are being hurt are the people who I grew up with. And it's people in my family, So, yeah, I felt like I had to try and do something, which is why I'm doing the work I do now.
I can't, that story. I love how you just skate over it. Yes, Citibank's globally most profitable trader. That's huge, Gary. That's mind-blowing. I mean, even hearing the story, I'm like, what? Like, well,
it was an ambition of mine. I was very young, I just turned 25 when that happened. Mm-hmm. But I love trading and I've got a slightly obsessive nature and I wanted to understand it and I wanted to be good at it and that's what I did. And it's just a mad situation when like you just want to master your skill, you want to master your craft, and the end result is you see this enormous disaster that's going to happen and nobody else knows. You know what I mean? That's literally, I made my money by betting that an enormous disaster would happen that no one else knew about. And then I had to sit and watch it happen, and now with COVID, we're seeing that a much quicker increase in inequality and an equivalent disaster happening now. And it's, I mean, of course, I'm very proud of what I achieved, but, it comes with this responsibility, which is, I understand the situation that's happening. And if we don't take action, because inequality is not getting better, it's getting worse and worse and worse. And if we don't take action, then the economy will get worse and worse and worse as well.
I love that you speak a lot on your YouTube channel, which everybody should go look. Like every single video, I learned so much. I was like, wow, I didn't even think about that. Gary's Economics. But you speak about how one of the most bizarre things about being alive right now is that people will say, oh, the economy is doing great. And what they mean is that Jeff Bezos made $19 billion in a day. But how is the economy doing well when people can't afford homes, people can't afford cars, people can't, like, even food is getting more expensive? We're heading towards a climate emergency. Like, how is the economy doing well again? Like, I don't understand.
I remember we had here in the UK in 2011, we had a situation which was very similar to now, where, economic growth was high because there was a level of bounce back, but simultaneously, the basic cost of living was going up very quickly. And ordinary people were struggling to, heat their homes, pay the bills, pay for food. And the narrative coming from the media was there's a very strong economic recovery and a cost of living crisis. And I remember just thinking like, what is a strong economy in your mind? You know what I mean? If there's a crisis in basic cost of living, and you know, there's a guy in this country who briefly got involved in politics called Russell Brand. I remember he went on TV and he spoke. He's from close to where I'm from, East London, Essex, and he spoke about what was happening on the streets, how people couldn't afford their rent, how they were getting kicked out of their homes, how they're becoming homeless. And the guy on TV, who is an economist, who went to Oxford, by the way, he put on the screen a 150-year graph of GDP growth. And I remember thinking, we've reached this problematic point here where economists, rather than explaining what's happening, all they're doing is obfuscating. All they're doing is blocking it. They're saying, no, look, the numbers are good, so everything's fine. And I think we have this problem, especially in economics, where economics has become such a privileged discipline, where increasingly almost everyone going into it, especially going up to high levels, master's, PhD, come from such a rich background. Their lives are great. And then, you know, GDP growth is going up. So for them, that means everything's good. And yet ordinary people increasingly can't afford homes, increasingly can't afford to even have a basic standard of life. The problem is economists don't look at averages, right? So if the rich are getting massively richer and everyone else is falling off, well, the averages can be going up slowly. But yeah, I think what's important, and what I try to do a lot with my channel, is I want ordinary people to feel like you have a right to say what's happening in your life. And if your life is not getting better, and the people in your community, if their lives are not getting better, you have a right to put your hand up and say, no, the economy is not good. The economy is not good. There was a really great moment in the Brexit debates here, before Brexit happened, where I think it was George Osborne, who was our chancellor at the time, said if we leave the European Union, GDP will fall by 3.7% or something. And a lady in the audience stood up and said, that's your GDP. And I remember thinking, yes, you are allowed to say that. You are allowed to say that. But so much we've made economics this discipline where somebody stands up and says, look, I'm suffering. My family's suffering. My community's suffering. And some wonk with a bow tie says, oh, but the numbers are fine. Well, who gives a fuck about the numbers? It's not about the numbers. Economics is about people's lives. It should be about people's lives. And that's why I felt that it was so important that I made a YouTube channel where I speak in language ordinary people can understand, and I explain things in a way ordinary people can understand. And it's for ordinary people, because ordinary people are the ones who are suffering in this economic crisis. So they need to be brought into the room and into the conversation.
Well, and I just some of the questions I was going to ask you, you're answering, and everything. So how I met Gary is we were covering the Patriotic Millionaires Conference in Washington, D.C., where people like you with a substantial net worth are like, hey, I want to be taxed more. I don't want to watch the public sector crumble. I don't want to watch people not be able to afford basic necessities. And you got up to speak, and I was just like, finally, somebody is talking about these things in a way that does not sound so academic and so just, I'm sorry, if you're an intellectual, I think that's great. It's important to have intellectuals, but these are people's lives. These are people's livelihoods and our futures. And there should be an urgency and kind of like a normalcy to it, right? This is we're all experts on the details of our own lives and finances. You shouldn't need a master's degree in economics to talk about it.
We've dehumanized economics way too much, and I've got 2 economics degrees, right? One from the LSE and one from Oxford. And, I remember I talked to my friends, right? And I talked to their families. And I say to them, like, what do you think we talk about in our economics degree? So, do you think we talk about the housing crisis? Do you think we talk about why wages aren't keeping up with the cost of living? And they're like, yeah, of course you talk about that kind of stuff. We don't. We do not talk about 5 years at university. I've never once spoken about why wages have not kept up with the cost of living. I've never once spoke meaningfully about why houses have become so unaffordable. You know what I mean? I spoke to one of my professors at Oxford, and I said to him, I used to argue with the professor at Oxford a lot. And I said to him, why are you not talking about the housing crisis? And he said to me, because the housing crisis is only in London, right? And I said to him, well, that's because that's where all the jobs are. The jobs are in London. And he said to me, that's not true. I've got a job. This guy's economics professor at Oxford University, as if someone who's lost a job, in the north of England, which might be equivalent to the Midwest, is going to be like, oh, well, maybe I'll go to Oxford and become an economics professor. It's
oh my gosh.
the problem. And if you look at the statistics, you'll see that economics is by far the least representative of socioeconomic class of any subject, which is crazy. You know what I mean? And it has the most likely to have people whose parents have a PhD, the least likely to have people whose parents don't have a PhD in economics. Yeah, I think it drives me mad. But then the worst thing of it all is these guys who are continually policing the debate, consistently wrong for 15 years. You know what I mean? So they sit up there and they say, you shouldn't tax rich people. Everything's fine. Everything's going to get better next year. These guys have been saying things are going to get better next year for 15 years, and it hasn't happened. You know what I mean? And I confronted one of the professors about this at Oxford, right? Why do you think you guys have been wrong for 15 years? And he was like, no, we haven't. We haven't been wrong for 15 years. And I had to go home and send in the data. And these guys, they're so disconnected from reality. The truth is they are so bad, they are not even able to realize they're bad. That is the truth. But we've created this world now where, if you think about it, all of the best economists, imagine you're a young, talented economist, right? From an ordinary background, like I was, right? You got a good degree from, LSE, which might be like MIT or Harvard. You can become an academic, which means studying for 10 more years and paying hundreds of thousands of dollars in tuition, or you can go and work on Wall Street. And I was a millionaire in 3 years.
Yeah.
So, and then when you're working in Wall Street, you're legally not allowed to talk publicly. So you create this situation where you pick all of the best economists and you lock them to skyscrapers. You know what I mean? You don't let them talk. And if you were going to call up Citibank and say, what do you think is going to happen to the economy? Are they going to put you on the phone to me? No, they're not. If you're from media, they're going to put you on the phone to someone who gets paid 10% of what I pay. So basically, we've created this system where we intentionally pick all the best economists and we make them work on trading floors and we ban them from speaking publicly. And, if you look at what's happening now, the traders on the trading floors, they know that we're in for 20 years of disaster. And if you look at the markets, that's obvious. But the guys on the TV are not saying that, right? We've created this. It's really interesting how within economics, there's two worlds of economics. There's the world of the people who are actually allowed to manage money, and you will never hear them. And there's the world of the people who speak on the TV, who've got no idea what they're doing. It's really worrying.
I had no idea. I didn't know that. So are you allowed to be speaking to me now? Like, what is do you sign NDAs? How does that work?
No, I can speak to you now, but when you're when you're a trader at the bank, you are not allowed to speak to the newspapers. You're not allowed to speak to the media. And they will have people whose job is to speak to the media. I was trading European interest rates, but they also have someone whose job is to write reports on European interest rates. And if you call up Citibank as a member of the press, say, what do you think about European interest rates? They don't put you through to me. They put you through to someone who makes 10% of what I make. You know what I mean? So they're really actively privatizing what they consider to be the best knowledge and pushing out what they consider to be not as good knowledge. And that's the way it works.
Well, and so I think it really does blow my mind that people can be wrong over and over and over again and still teach at the London School of Economics and still teach at Oxford. Like, how did you handle that as a smart dude?
The maddest thing is they don't even realize. I think it's bad to be wrong, if you're an expert. And it's bad to be wrong again and again and again and again and again. But to be wrong consistently for 10 years and not realize you've done it, that is unforgivable. That is unforgivable. It's unforgivably bad. Really, seriously, it's unforgivably bad. And I don't think no more you can say about it than that. And it was shocking. It was shocking. But the thing is, I kind of knew because, you work on the trading floor, you get the guys coming through they're the best of the best, right? These are the guys with the best grades from the best universities in the world coming through on the trading floor. And they come through and they've got no idea what they're doing, because in the universities, literally, if you go to a economics department at an elite university, what you will see is 100 people locked in the library doing algebra. That is all they do. Do algebra, memorize algebra. They invert matrices. They memorize a ton of that. All they're doing is memorizing algebra. It's insane. And, I remember I was quite lucky on the trading floor. There was one really good trader who I worked with who didn't go to university, and he was from Liverpool. And he started working as a teller at a bank here in England. And over the course of 20, 30 years, he got promoted and promoted and promoted until he was one of the top traders at Citibank. And, I started working in the financial crisis and I was really interested in what was happening. So I was bringing in my textbooks and I was looking in my textbooks. This guy came over, he took my textbooks and just threw them in the bin. And he said to me, look, if you want to know what's happening in the economy, walk down the street, look at what shops are closing down. Look at the advertisements on the tube. Ask your parents about their financial situation. Ask your friends and your friends' parents. Walk through the city and see if there's more or less homeless people. That's the economy. This is the economy. You're in the economy. You're not a kid anymore. You need to involve yourself in the world and understand what's happening. But unfortunately, the economists that we're training at universities, they're more involved in their own models and in their own algebra than what's actually happening. And it's a great shame because, if you are sick and your doctors have no idea what's happening, you're going to die, But that is what's happening to our economy. The economy is sick. It's got a serious problem of inequality. It's getting worse and worse and worse and worse. And the economists have no idea what's happening. And in fact, they're saying it's not even sick. So, yeah, on the one hand, it's maddening. On the other hand, I make a ton of money out of it, because these guys are wrong all the time, right? But, I said this at the speech where we met, right? I don't want to make a ton of money off of it anymore because, I can make money off of disaster again and again and again, but the disasters keep happening. And I don't want the disasters to keep happening because, we need to think about what does it mean for the future of our world and the future of our countries. I come from a poor area. These people out here, they're not going to be able to heat their homes next winter. This is in the UK, right? This is one of the richest countries in the world. And I know it's the same where you are. That is insane. And there's people out here there's parents who are skipping meals because it's the only way to feed their kids. This is insane, right? And this is at the same time as the largest ever increase in millionaire and billionaire wealth. The average billionaire in the States doubled their wealth in the last 2 years. And ordinary people can't eat. And economists are saying, oh, well, there's nothing we can do. There's no money. It's just insane, right? The biggest ever increase in billionaire wealth. And then economists just say, oh, there's nothing we can do. There's no money. It's, it drives me mad. That's why I do what I do. That's why I come on stuff like this. That's why I make the YouTube channel. But I think the most important thing is that ordinary people have access to good information and understand what's happening. And that's why, I'm going to plug my YouTube, but that's what it's there for, to explain to ordinary people what's happening. Because if you don't understand, you can't protect yourselves. And unfortunately, most of the mainstream media is not communicating it clearly.
Well, and I'm sorry I'm such a fan of yours. We need more of you, Gary. Like, we really do. And another thing you and I spoke about when we were hanging out is like, okay, we need to be working together more. Because one thing that blows my mind as a person who works in progressive media, why aren't we working together? Why aren't, you and I need to be friends and more people like us need to be friends, because it's not even like, oh, the trends are similar. It's the exact same companies. We're talking about Citibank. We're talking about Elon Musk. It's not like, but I think, so you've discussed this on your YouTube channels about how people like channel. People like to make it seem like this is like, oh, it's just London. Yeah, housing is out of control in London. No, in any major city, normal people are getting pushed out. And what do you think that is? Do they really why?
People like to nationalize it and make it specific. So first of all, the situation, I lived in Japan for 2 years when I was a trader. I traded the economies of the UK, the Eurozone, and the US. The situations are very similar in these places. Of course, they're not exactly the same, but in all of these places, we have inequality of wealth increasing relatively quickly, interest rates stuck at very low levels, housing in the big cities becoming extremely unaffordable, and yet large areas of the country becoming increasingly deserted because of a lack of jobs. And that description, that could have been the US, that could have been the UK, that could have been France, that could have been Japan, that could have been Italy. All of these places have the exact same problems. When I was working in the city, here in London, everybody thinks there's a housing crisis because of planning policy in London. But then we had an office in Australia, and the Australian traders will come over and they'd say, oh, there's a terrible problem in Sydney because of the housing crisis, because of the planning policy in Sydney. And we had a couple of traders from Canada, and they say, oh, in Toronto, there's a terrible housing crisis because of planning problems. But it's clearly a global problem. I could list 10 cities for you that have a housing crisis that people think is local. It's the same in Tokyo, it's the same in Shanghai, it's the same in Hong Kong, it's the same in Los Angeles. It's the same all over the world. It's the same in Mumbai. these are global problems, and ultimately it's caused by it's because it's a global elite that is getting richer and richer. You know, you can explain this relatively simply, right? Ordinary people spend their money, rich people buy assets. So if you take money and wealth from ordinary people and give it to rich people, there will be less demand for goods and services, which is what drives your wages, and more demand for assets. So you'll see house prices go up and wages go down. And that is happening all over the world. It's a global problem. And we do need to come together, you know, because what people will come back, they'll come back and say, well, you can't tax the rich people because they'll leave. You know what I mean? But, you know, and they'll just go to a place that has the same problems. You know what I mean? So, you know, it's very important that we, as ordinary people that are in most cases suffering from the same problems, come together and form a united front and say, look, doesn't matter where they go, we're going to tax them. We're not going to allow these guys to avoid taxation by coming to our country. You know what I mean? Like, you know, if effectively the rich working together because they're saying, you know, we will move as a group. We will move as a group. And it's important that ordinary people work together as well and say, well, we will tax you as a group. You know what I mean? If they divide us and make us fight against each other, then we will lose. So yeah, I think it's very important. It's important for people to understand that, you know, we are all facing the same problems, because it's very easy, and you see elements in the media doing this, to intentionally drive us apart and try and make us hate foreigners. You know, we've seen increasingly this happen in Europe, and it's happening in the US as well. The problem is those foreigners. We're all suffering the same problems here. We're all struggling to find good jobs, to find affordable housing. You know, talk to young people from all over the world. You know what I mean? You could talk to young people in India. They'll tell you the same thing. You know what I mean? People all over the world are suffering the same problems, and we need to come together if we want to fight back.
Well, and I love, you know, when you said that, I just felt so energized. I was like, yes, exactly. Because that is what they do. They threaten us. They're like, oh, well, we're going to take our company abroad. Okay, that doesn't work if we as liberal democracies especially stand together and are like, you know what? Great, do it. You know, because at the end of the day, somebody made this point once, and I think about it a lot. Billionaires are elitists. They want to be in London. They want to be in New York City. So if we create a block of like, yeah, if you want to be associated with these major urban areas whatsoever, you have to do the bare minimum. Because I love how simply you said it. When we give money to rich people, assets go up. And when we give money to ordinary people, it goes back into the economy. Because ordinary people buy stuff. They buy products, they buy homes, they go on vacations. They're not going to do weird real estate games where they drive costs up everywhere. That's not how ordinary people think or behave.
Yeah, I mean, this has been the fundamental economic problem for the last 15 years, which is you can pour as much money as you like into the economy. If it never reaches ordinary people, it's not going to do anybody any good. And if all it does is push house prices up, that ultimately hurts ordinary families. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Because it means, and I think it's very important to communicate to older people that might think it's good when their house price goes up. Look, if your house price goes up, think about your kids. Think about, where are my kids going to live? Where are my grandkids going to live? You know, 30, 40 years ago, the average house price in this country, the UK, was 2 times average salary. Now in London, it's coming up to 20, 30 times average salary. That reaches a situation now where if you own a home, you might think you're winning, but increasingly young people will never, ever be able to afford property, you know, and I want people to think about their families in the long run. You know, where do you want your kids to live? Where do you want your grandkids to live? Because ordinary people as a group are losing their homes, they're losing their property, you know. So, yeah, it's frustrating, but I think it's important that people realize there are alternatives. These people are taxable. It's as you say, you know, these guys, they can leave if they want, but ultimately, the corporations they own, where are their customers? The customers are in the US. The customers are in Europe. You know what I mean? They're nothing without the US and Europe. And most of the assets that they own are in Europe. You know, we had a situation here, obviously, the Russia war in Ukraine. There's a well-known Russian oligarch in this country, Roman Abramovich, who owns one of the biggest football clubs in the country, the biggest football club in London. Suddenly, he wants to leave. The football club is still there. You know what I mean? These guys are not rich because they're magic. They're rich because they own our stuff. You know what I mean? And if they can leave, their stuff is still here, and we can take it. We can tax it.
I love that you say that, because it is so funny to me how it's refreshing to hear a brilliant economist saying what I think normal people like me tend to suspect. Everyone acts as if these people are Teflon or superheroes. Like, oh, we can't tax them. It's like, what? Yes, you can. What do you mean you can't tax them?
Yeah,
telling me
they're not magic. You know
what?
what I mean? Like, I think what this one single good thing that has come out of this recent conflict is it has shown that when governments want to tax rich people, they can tax them because these guys aren't magic. I think we've created this sort of myth of the rich person, like they're just a guy with an enormous bank account. They can take that bank account wherever they want. These guys own our houses, right? They own our mortgages. They own our corporations. They own our properties. They own our shopping centers. They own our office blocks. You know what I mean? They can't just magic them off to the Cayman Islands. That stuff exists in our countries, and we are poor increasingly because the assets that exist in our countries are owned by these wealthy people who pay no taxes. If you give your country away to a group of people that have no loyalty to your country, threaten to leave at a moment's notice and pay no taxes, you can't be surprised when ordinary people are struggling to eat. You can't just give all your assets away and not expect to be poor, but that is increasingly what we're doing.
Well, and just even the fact that this conversation is so delayed, because it's like you've been doing this for a while. And I feel like it's really only these past few years that this is finally becoming into the public sphere. This conversation not that long ago would have been considered over the top radical, which is so wild to me. We're talking about just like the middle class and the working class having the ability to exist without being financially ripped off in every sector. There's nothing radical about that.
Yeah, I mean, what I always try and do is I make predictions, okay? Because I'm a millionaire because I'm good at making predictions, okay? The opposite side is going to say you shouldn't tax the rich, we should let them keep all their money, it's going to do well for the economy. The truth is, if that happens, which is what's currently happening, the economy is going to be an absolute shipwreck. And we're going to see increasingly worse and worse things happen. Ordinary people not being able to afford homes. Ordinary people not being able to afford decent quality food, right? Ordinary people not being able to accumulate any assets or get wealthy. This is what is happening, So people can call me radical all they want, okay? Go back and look. I would encourage people to go and watch the very first video on my YouTube channel, okay? It's called How COVID-19 Will Make the Rich Richer, okay? And I predict that COVID-19 will cause the biggest ever increase in millionaire and billionaire wealth, a massive increase in inequality, a massive increase in house prices, and a massive inflation crisis. These things are predictable in advance. It's not rocket science, right? The US gave $2 trillion effectively to the wealthiest people in COVID, okay? You can't just give the rich $2 trillion and expect nothing to happen. If you give the rich $2 trillion, they will get richer and the rest of the country will get poorer. It's not people, and people can see the results. So, it's not radical when it's happening. You know what I mean?
Well, and it's, the thing I appreciate most about you, many things, but I think a lot of people in your situation would have gotten wealthy and been like, see, I'm just better than other people. Bye. But that's not what you did. You were like, okay, wait a minute. This is still incredibly screwed. Like, what is happening?
Yeah.
And I just what was that? Was there any temptation to just like buy a mega yacht and be like, peace?
The thing is, I was in a very specific situation. I became rich exactly because I figured out people were going to be screwed. Do you see what I'm saying? Like that is
fair.
Exactly how I made my money, right? Like I understood that the economy was being misunderstood at a big structural level, that we were headed into a disaster, that we were never going to get better. So, I am proud that I figured that out. But and I find it funny. People ask me this all the time. Why do you do it? If you saw somebody's house was on fire, you'd call it out the windows, wouldn't you? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's what our economy is on fire. And I was one of the first guys to see that. I saw it early. And I'm knocking on the doors and I'm trying to tell people because, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. If we don't do anything here, things are going to get worse. Things are going to get a lot worse. And it's going to be really, really bad. And it's serious. It's serious. I watched The Big Short the other day, and I don't watch too many movies about trading, but this one's not too bad. There's one scene where like a couple of traders, they make a load of money on a trade and they're getting really happy. And there's this Brad Pitt character and he says, don't dance. Do you understand what you're betting on? You're betting on a disaster. And when you have an economic disaster, people become homeless and people die. You know what I mean? This genuinely is what is going to happen. And it's not going to fix itself. It will get worse and worse and worse, right? This inequality is a cancer in our economy that will not fix itself. The things which I'm forecasting, they are genuinely terrible things. So So, you know, yeah, I could go and live on a beach on the Philippines, you know what I mean? But, you know, I want to have kids one day and they're going to live in a world that is terrible, you know what I mean? And then, you know, they're going to grow up and I'm going to say, oh, I made all this money by betting that everything would be terrible, you know, and they're going to say, what did you do? And I'll just be, oh, well, I just bet on it and made a ton of money, you know. If you know really bad things are going to happen, you have a responsibility to try and, at the very least, tell people, you know, so they could do. And so that's why I'm doing what I'm doing, you know what I mean? You know, I'm not an old man yet. I've still got time in me. And, you know, I would like to try and stop this disaster. You know what I mean? Hopefully you're in. Hopefully people watching are in as well, in which case, subscribe to my YouTube. But it's going to get worse, you know, and I don't want it to happen. So
well, and read his book. I'm sorry. I know that like I shouldn't be hyping that yet, but you will have a book coming out within the next year or two. So
yeah, so that's the main thing. So I've been working on the YouTube for about 1.5 years now. We got some great videos on there, but you know, it wasn't getting the reach that I need. You know, more people need to see it. So I've been thinking about how can we grow it. And I was speaking to some people in the publishing world and they were like, you know, you should write a book about your story because, you know, my story, it's a pretty crazy story. You know, I was expelled from school for what I tend to call a drug-related incident when I was 16. And, you know, like, and 7 years later, I was the best trader in the world at Citibank. You know what I mean? So that's a crazy story. And you know, you become the best trader by betting on disaster. And, you know, I was never a political person. I'm not from a political family. I didn't want to be in politics, but I went into the world of finance and I saw a disaster happening and I tried to tell people and nobody cared. They just kept like shoving money in my face. You know what I mean? And that politicizes a person. And my hope is that I can write a story that will put people in my shoes, you know, bring them onto the trading floor, let them see what I saw, let them see the disaster coming, let them see the tsunami coming that's going to hit society the way I saw it. And they'll be politicized too, you know. And, you know, there's a lot of people that might be interested in trading and making money that are just focused on themselves and not really politicized the way I wasn't. But, you know, my hope is if I write a book that shows people what I saw, they'll be politicized too and they'll come on board and they'll say, look, we need to stop this disaster the same way I'm doing what I do.
Well, and, you know, whenever we talk, I think about the fact that, like, you know, I feel like people who may be listening to the superficial side of this would be like, oh, this is all negative. It's actually very positive because what you're saying is that when you give ordinary people power, they tend to make good decisions. Ordinary people are not trying to, you know, don't want to hurt each other. They want their neighbors to survive. They want to put the literal and figurative fire out.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that because, you know, I do get criticized for being quite negative sometimes. And, you know, I think if people understand my history of predicting disasters and being continually right, you understand why I'm so negative. But if we understand that the problem is inequality and we actually start to meaningfully do something about it, the potential for improvement is enormous. The potential for economic improvement is absolutely enormous. Seriously, if we were to actually do something serious about inequality, manage our economy such that ordinary people got a decent share of our output and of our wealth, you could genuinely live in an economy where ordinary people could get rich, where ordinary people could afford to have big houses and good lives, or they could afford to just not work 100-hour weeks and be able to support their families. You know, these things are possible. You know, there's a great British economist called John Maynard Keynes that said his grandkids would have to work, I think it was just 2 days a week because technology would improve so much. But we've given all those benefits to the rich, and it means the rest of us have ended up working even harder than he did. But if we deal with inequality seriously, I genuinely believe you can go back to a situation where ordinary people can afford big houses and good lives, you know, like we've done in the past. But it can be even better now because technology is so much more advanced. So, you know, it's not just about preventing disaster. If we really grasp this nettle and deal with inequality seriously, I honestly believe we can give our kids and grandkids really, really good lives where they can be rich and live lives of real quality.
I love that you say that because it is such a hopeful thing, isn't it? I mean, think about, you know, we forget all the stuff we have now that just didn't exist even 10, 20 years ago. The ability to work remotely from anywhere, the amount, like artificial intelligence is supposed to be hopeful.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be.
You know what it's like? You know, I use this metaphor that inequality is a cancer in the economy. And the truth is, if you have cancer and you don't remove that cancer, you will die. But that cancer is making our economy desperately sick. You can see what's happening. But if we get rid of that cancer, then this economy can come back to full health, full life. You know what I mean? You know, my dad worked for the post office here for 35 years, right? He was able to afford a house, you know, raise a family. That's not possible nowadays. But we can go to a situation where that is possible again, where the ordinary, hardworking people of my country and of your country can give good, decent lives to their kids. That is possible. That is 100% possible. But it's only possible if we deal with wealth inequality.
Well, and you talk to people about money, like, and people will come to you and be like, hey, Gary, like, you're a brilliant trader. What should I do? And one thing I love is that you really caution people. You're like, hey, if you're barely making it by, please don't like buy Bitcoin or something and think that's going to be your, that's just not how it works right now. I'm not sure if it ever worked that way, but it definitely doesn't work that way now.
I think it's, you know, if the ship you're on is sinking, then any lifeboat looks good. You know what I mean?
Dang. Yeah.
And
yes.
people, you know, I said my dad worked for the post office for 35 years, okay? And I was lucky, you know, I had this gift, this maths gift. I mean, I could go work in the city. But if I didn't have that, I'm going to look at my dad and be like, well, if I do what he did, I'll probably be homeless. You know what I mean? You know, never mind having a family. So if you're, you know, if you're putting a generation of young men and women in a space where they look up to their parents and say, if I do that, I'll be desperately poor. Well, then these guys are going to look for any alternative. You know what I mean? And, you know, it's not just crypto. It's not just Bitcoin. There's online trading, which is increasingly pulling people in. There's all kinds of online scams. But when work isn't working, people are going to look for alternatives. And often the internet is going to sell you alternatives that are not healthy. You know what I mean? And, you know, I've strongly warned people against advising investing in Bitcoin. The one thing I would say is don't put any money into crypto that you're not willing and able to lose 100% of, because that is a genuine risk in crypto. You know, it's up whatever 900% in 3 years. Something that can rise 900% can fall 99%. That is a thing that can happen, right? But the problem is people need hope.
Yeah.
And the current economy is not giving them hope. So if some guy turns up like, well, buy my magic internet dog money and you'll be a millionaire, you can see why people like that. You know what I mean? And people are going to be angry. And I just want to say to people who are angry, if you're angry because I'm saying that Bitcoin or whatever is a bad investment, please ask yourself why it means that much to you. Because if a guy on the internet saying your investment is a bad investment makes you angry, you are probably being defrauded. Because if you are that emotionally invested in your single investment, then you are basically asking to be conned. And you know, I've got one video on my YouTube that is Bitcoin, and we get paid 10 times as much per advert on that as any of our other videos. Think about why that is. Just please think about why that is. Why do you think it is that people are willing to pay 10 times as much to advertise to guys who are thinking about Bitcoin? Please. And
Okay, Gary, you just solved Bitcoin for me completely, because, you know, about a year ago, I guess, I was like really trying to understand, like, you know, again, if you want to buy crypto for sure. But I couldn't understand the passion behind it, frankly, from people who weren't even making money off of it. It didn't make sense. But
no, I met a guy in a pub the other day. He's from Ilford, where I'm from, in East London. And he was like, what do you do? And I was like, I was a trader. And he was like, I said, what do you do? And he said, oh, I work in IT, but I've got a plan to be a millionaire. And I was like, oh, well, what's the plan? And he was like, I'm going to make millions trading crypto. And seriously, like, honestly, I just fucking worry for the guy. Like, you know what I mean? Like, if that is your life plan, you're just game to be conned, man. But I understand what other options. This guy's not even going to be able to buy a house otherwise. So I understand. And I wish there were more better options. And look, there's a video about investing on my channel. It tells the truth about investing, which is the truth is for ordinary people, there's no safe way to make a ton of money investing. You know, if you come in with $1 million, then yeah, we can talk. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But unfortunately, and I know that's not the message people want to hear, but the message I'm giving is, look, we can make things better if we're willing to come together and if we're willing to understand what's happening, if we're willing to reach out to our communities and push back.
Yeah, it turns out the best financial plan is global solidarity. Go figure.
Yeah, I mean,
if you're ordinary, of course, as I am.
Yeah, in history, you know, when did the workers do well? It wasn't when they were buying dogs on the internet. You know what I mean? It was when they fought back. You know what I mean? That's how it works. You know.
I'm
But good
sorry,
luck
but
to anyone
like,
out there who's doing it. You know, I know I'm going to get some hate for it, but you know,
no,
not for
because
me.
I
It's not
actually
for me.
don't hear you. Like, I don't hear hate. And actually, it's really refreshing to talk to someone who feels how I feel about it, which is like, you get a lot of people mocking people for crypto. And I think that's unfortunate because I love what you just said. If you're on a sinking ship, any lifeboat looks good. And that is what it says to me, that we do have this, oh, like, here's a side hustle which worked for my friend's cousin, so I'm gonna
Yeah, man.
go all in on
I
it.
know. I don't listen. I'm rich now. You know what I mean? I'm not going to point at people who are still poor and trying to make money and laugh at them because I've
Right.
been there. You know what I mean? And I know these guys are just trying to do stuff for their family. I feel bad for them, and I worry. You know, I go to restaurants and I hear people talking about it, and I worry. I worry about it. That's all it is.
Well, so one of your advice for people that are not millionaires is to really focus on buying property because it's just going to get worse. Is that correct still?
Yeah, I mean, I predict property prices will go up a lot. I've been saying that since the beginning of the crisis, and I've been right. And I 100% know that a lot of people listening, especially young people, are not going to enjoy that advice. And, you know, I keep giving advice that's not nice to hear, and I don't want to keep doing it, but that's what I believe. So I would strongly encourage that. The truth is, you know, we say in markets, you know, if you don't own any property, you're short one property because you need to live in a place. You know what I mean? So, you know, I would encourage, and I know it's not easy, but if that's the thing you can do, you know, if you can have a discussion with your family about releasing equity from their home to help you get property, it's going to become increasingly more and more difficult for ordinary people to own property. So I would encourage people to do what they can to get access to property, because the chances are slipping away, and that's not good. And we're trying to change that, but in the meantime, yeah, it's going to get harder.
Yeah, worst case scenario, we do change it on a policy level and then it gets easier for everyone. But when you said that, it really reoriented me. I was like, damn, he's making a really good point.
Yeah, and it's, you know, I know I keep giving depressing news, but you know, like when the tsunami's coming, nobody wants to hear the tsunami's coming, you know?
Right.
Like there's a few things you can do. I discuss it on my channel, but whenever I discuss it, I also come in and say, look, please be aware that the situation is getting worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. And that will only be prevented by political action. You know what I mean? So, of course, I totally understand people are going to be like, what can I do for me and what can I do for my family? And that has to be everyone's number one priority. But you also need to understand if you have anything spare to give, I'm not talking about money, I'm talking about effort and time and reaching out to your friends and family. Help us build this movement, because you might be able to look after yourself, but what about your kids? What about your grandkids? If we allow things to get worse and worse and worse over time, then they're not going to be secure. So unfortunately, as much as being political is hardest for the poor, it's most important for the poor, because if those people are not political, they are the guys that are going to get hit, because I guarantee you the rich are political. You know what I mean? If you don't play that game, you're going to lose it.
Well, and you and I talked about something that I think is really interesting. Like, the reason I love it when people like you become millionaires and become traders and everything is because, like, we were talking about how, like, it's easy to vilify the wealthy, but the reality is a lot of wealthy were probably raised wealthy, which means they just don't know certain things. And I'm not
Yeah,
like letting them off the hook at all, but like they might
yeah.
not actually know what this
This
stuff
is
really means for normal
this is not
people.
about good and evil, man. Like it's about making sure people have homes. You know what I mean?
Yes.
You know what I mean? And we throw hate around. I don't think we win. I don't think that's how we win. You know what I mean? Like, you know, there's a reason that Rupert Murdoch throws hate around in his newspapers, because hate is easily divides people. You know what I mean? And we only win if we come together. You know, and I always say this on my YouTube, we need to come together, and that's how we win. And look, there's all different kinds of people out there. You know what I mean? But look, you know, I'm a wealthy person. I'm a millionaire now. You know what I mean? But I'm doing this. Nobody pays me to do this. You know what I mean? I do this because I believe in it. You know, I don't make any money out of this. And if there's other rich people out there that want to support the message, then come in. You know what I mean? I'm not crossing the door to nobody. You know, anyone who wants to support this, they can come in. You know, and I've worked in the city. There's some good people there. There's some bad people there as well. Don't get me wrong. But, you know, it's the same as, you know, and anyone out there will know that who work in their jobs and their communities, there's good and bad people everywhere, you know. That's the way the world is.
And that's a problem. I mean, I think, in progressive spaces, like, the word oppression Olympics gets thrown around a lot. People just like, oh, we're just gonna, instead of, okay, but like, how can we build power together? Which
Yeah,
does
man.
mean aligning with people who do have privilege by all means.
Yeah, look, everyone should have their space where they can talk about what's affecting them specifically and their communities.
Totally.
But we also need to be able to unite across all sorts of borderlines, because if we don't do that, if we are divided, we will lose. If we are divided, we will lose. So, people need to open their hearts to one another and understand their specific problems, but also be willing to step across them and come together. That is the only way that we win this. It's the only way that we win this.
So I have a overshare question for you that I've not asked you before.
Okay.
But it was in the doc. So would you do anything differently? Like go back to high school? Like would
Yeah,
you
I saw
change
that
it?
back to high school. Well, I mean, it's a funny one. You say that immediately because obviously I got expelled from high school, but I wouldn't even change that because, I got expelled from high school and I was in quite a good school because I passed this exam and then I went back to like the local state school. But I made new friends and I've made a lot of mistakes. I'm sure you have done too. You know what I mean?
Yes.
But I always did the best. I always did the best I could at the time. And obviously I could have made more money trading. If I'd have known, I could have made more money trading, and then I could have poured a bit more money into my YouTube channel. That maybe would have helped this. But look, I don't live in the past. I live in the now. I'm still pushing. And the one thing I would say is, look, I maybe said some stuff that is depressing. Okay. I don't need to do this, right? Like I've said, I could be on a beach in the Philippines, and I wouldn't do this if I didn't think we could win. You know what I mean? So I do this because I think it's possible for us to win. So I want people to believe, and I want people to support, and I want people to come together. And I wouldn't change anything because I still think there's a chance, and I still want to fight to the end. And I'll keep going.
I actually feel very energized by this conversation. I think it's super hopeful. Because look, when you think about it, it's weirdly stressful to tell people, okay, you've got to somehow become a millionaire in a system which has made that more difficult than ever. It's actually kind of hopeful to be like, you know what, you're not imagining it. The deck is stacked against you.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. One message I really want to give people out there. We've created this world that judges you on your financial outcomes, right?
Yes.
And yet, for so many people, gives them almost no chance of getting rich. That's a fucking horrible thing to do to people. It's a horrible thing to do. It's horrible to tell somebody, if you're not rich, you're a failure, and yet guarantee they can't get rich. It's horrible. So if people are out there and you're hustling and you're struggling and you're trying, this is not your fault. You're doing the best you can. You were doing the best that you can, and this game was rigged against you from the start. So I want people to be proud. I want people to be proud of whatever it is they have achieved, because if we make people do this hustle thing to chase money and make it impossible for them to get money, it could be a mental health disaster. So I want people to be proud of whatever it is that they do, whatever money that they make, and the support they provide to their friends and their family. This is where you need to find your pride, because increasingly the world does not give ordinary people money and riches. So don't let them trick you into thinking that's what's important.
I love that. That's wonderful. No, because you're right. I mean, I've internalized it too, right? How can you not? It's like we exalt people like these wealthy celebrities and business people or whatever, and that's where we get our worth. And then we give away what actually does matter, which is like community and a sense of peace that you can't buy that. You really can't.
My parents were never rich, they've never been rich, okay? And I've been in the skyscrapers with millionaires, and I can tell you who's happier right now. This is not a happy place, these skyscrapers, People will read more about that in my book when it comes out. But listen, you don't need to envy these people, right? They might look good on Instagram in their Lamborghinis, but, you don't know what goes on behind closed doors.
Well, your parents did a good job. I'm a big fan of their son.
Yeah, I'll let them know. They'll be happy to hear that.
Well, so what else can people, we're almost at time. What else can people do to get involved, help?
Okay, so I always say there's three things, right? Number one, understand what's happening, okay? My YouTube is largely explanatory. It's explaining in clear English what is happening, and I'm not just pimping my YouTube because it's my YouTube. I honestly think it will help you to understand what is happening right here, especially during COVID. Understand what's happening. Two is reach out to your friends and family, right? And help them understand what's happening. Give them a message like, look, if you don't understand the problem, things can seem hopeless. But say, look, this guy's explaining it. We can understand. If we understand, then we can come together and push back. And that is the third thing, is bring people around you together. Understand, look, this game is rigged against us. It's going to get worse. There's no way out of this unless we come together. Look, ultimately, the rich, they own the newspapers, they own the TV stations, they've got the money, they've got the assets, right? What we have is there's more of us. That is the only thing that we have, right? And if we don't unite, we will lose. You know what I mean? It's like in them kung fu movies when like 100 guys fight Bruce Lee one at a time. You know what I mean? we need to unite, all right? So look, please watch my videos and understand them. I've got a website as well, which we can put in the link, wealtheconomics.org. But the YouTube is the best place. Understand what's happening. Build your community and your friend and your family links. Help them understand as well. And then bring people together and say, let's push back. And that can mean the voting booth, but not just the voting booth. You know what I mean? There has to be a lot more to it. But it's about building understanding within our communities. That is how we win, in my opinion. And being willing to reach out to other people.
And taking care of each other. Like, I love that you say that, because it's like, yeah, we no longer live in a place where a single income can provide stability. So like, be there for your people and let them be there for you, or at least that's how I
we have to be united. Yeah, exactly. Be united and open your eyes and open your heart. Maybe that's cliche, but like, look, this is not an easy fight. It's not going to be easy. We're going to need each other. So help your people, man. You have to.
This is awesome, Gary. Thank you for making time. I know how busy you are.
Yeah, it's all right. It's only 2 more days of work and I've got a holiday. Nice. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you so much. Everybody find him on Gary's Economics on YouTube. Stay involved and hopefully we'll talk to you again soon.
Yes, hopefully. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.